think the NHS is an amazing invention, and I think is the envy of the world. But it's creaking and groaning, and it's not currently fit for purpose. So I think realistically we do need to look at areas where, for example, GPs and dentists and supplies, where we do work with the private sector. Instinctively, I think not so much in the healthcare area. So my heart says yes, we should stop all privatisation. My head says no, we have to look at all the options very carefully.
GPs have the highest, just about the highest approval rating of any profession in this country, but they're privatised. They are independent for the most part. Not all GPs are, but the vast, vast majority are entirely independent. They work privately within the NHS, and that relationship works very well. A lot of people raise Virgin, for example, Virgin Healthcare. They have some sizable contracts with the NHS. It's still a very, very small proportion of the NHS's money, but it could definitely be argued philosophically that that shouldn't be going anywhere other than to the NHS. But actually, it's hard to say, because I know that some Virgin contracts are controversial, but I know of some Virgin contracts where you've got GPs that have been placed in areas that didn't have any GPs. You've got GPs that are currently very happy. They've got some good terms and conditions with Virgin, and actually the contract is working out really well.
The trouble is, in my view, that if you were to set out to achieve the end of privatisation in the NHS, you'd have to have a fundamental restructuring of the NHS in order to achieve it. Because the way in which the NHS is structured at the moment, through clinical commissioning groups, where bits of work are commissioned and purchased, and you're required to go through a kind of competitive tendering process, creates the market in which the private sector can work. That's the problem, that we've created a monster by creating this kind of competitive tendering process, not us, but this government. And at the moment, I feel as though the NHS is being set up to fail by this government, by starving it of adequate resources.
What I think is important about it is to recognise that the NHS is changing, it will go on changing, and it may well be that those changes won't be acceptable to everybody, but there's a funding crisis that we know well, and we also know well that the demands on the NHS are going to get more and more as the population goes on ageing and is being kept alive for longer and longer with the NHS care.
And we know that there's a crisis in recruiting GPs, and we know that there are certain areas that are vastly under GP. So what do you do in that situation? Because we do know ultimately money does talk. And that's not necessarily justification for privatisation, absolutely not necessarily. I'm just saying that that's a solution that has been found. So you have to consider the consequences. What else do you want to privatise or stop privatisation within the NHS? Do you want the NHS to stop procuring things from private companies? Are they going to build their own beds? Are they going to, I don't know, to take it to a slightly silly extreme, build their own MRI scanners? They're not going to. So, you know, there's elements of privatisation within the NHS, and I just want people to think about what that actually means, because I hear a lot of knee-jerk, oh, we're going to stop privatisation within the NHS. And I'm not sure that people completely understand necessarily the pounds, shillings and pence attached and what that means.
But I would say if we are paying private healthcare providers, we are using some of our very, very pressurised budgets to shareholder profits, and that needs to be looked at carefully. The other thing that worries me about the NHS is from a service delivery point of view, I do believe that adult and social care should be integrated to the health service rather than the local authority. But is that just a backdoor way of more charges? Because in social care, it's known that people are assessed and do pay for their home care, and would that just be another backdoor way of increasing more charges? It's a very complex issue. So the heart says yes, head says no.
Where some of that spending on the NHS will need to come from the patients. Free at the point of care, yes, but dentistry isn't, eyes aren't, hearing isn't necessarily for the majority of people, and prescriptions are pretty expensive. So we already have inroads into that free at the point of use. Already have. And I've absolutely no doubt whatsoever, whoever is running the NHS, in whatever form it takes, will be shifted slightly in that direction. But to say, just based on pure ideological grounds, no, get rid of all your privatisation, seems to me to be missing some of the point.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy's right, it is creaking at the seams, but it's through lack of funding, and the way in which it's structured is just it's an organisational nonsense. The way in which the NHS is structured, it makes no sense at all. The fact that existing NHS staff doing a job of work have to re-tender for the work that they're already doing is completely balmy. But yeah, this is the nature of the service that this government has created, and we have to tackle that. And it's take a deep breath, because that's going to mean organisational change. And when Andy Burnham made the point in the last general election about the point that Kathy touched on about integrating health and social care, absolutely right. But then you ask, well, how are you going to do it without organisational change? And there's kind of, a bit of a silence. We have to be brave if we are going to really solve the problems of the NHS for the future, and it will mean some fundamental reorganisation.
Philosophically, I agree. The NHS is our great social innovation of the 20th century, along with pensions, along with the welfare state. We led the way in, and I want it to remain absolutely as it is, free at the point of use, based on need, not ability to pay. That is exactly how it ought to be, and I don't think there's really, there are a few oddballs in this country who disagree with that, but generally speaking, that is completely what British people agree with. And for me, the debate we should be having is how we pay for the NHS of the 21st century, and what our priorities for healthcare are in the 21st century, and not just have this slightly arcane, mostly fairly ill-informed debate around privatisation.
Just one other point.
No, you can.
No, just one other point about GPs. If we just go back a little bit in time, when we had primary care trusts before the dawn of clinical commissioning groups, and we had a Labour government, there was a moment in time when we were looking at a distinct possibility that we could have directly contracted general practitioners, not independent practitioners, but directly employed GPs, employed by primary care trusts. And all of that just kind of disappeared into the ether. And it was an absolute lost opportunity, because to be a GP, not only do you have to go through all of this amazing training, but of course you then become an independent business. So you have to have capital and resources and loans and all of this kind of stuff in order to be able to operate. And that is an obstacle. There's no doubt about that. That's one of the many reasons why we don't have enough GPs. But here was an opportunity for us to say, well, okay, you come out of medical school and you come and work for us, and you can be a GP and you can treat patients, and we'll provide you with surgery and the equipment and all of that kind of stuff, and you will be our employee. And all of that was lost, and that's huge lost opportunity in my view.